All right, it's ticking. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for signing up for this talk this evening. Tonight, we're discussing the Northwest in Transition, a project or proposal Congressman Simpson has spearheaded here. If I can put it as succinctly as possible, it can be boiled down to the removal of the lower 4 Snake River dams and salmon. And to help me out with what that means are some very well-educated people, folks in the loop, and we're going to pester them tonight with a lot of questions. I am your moderator, Ryan Callaghan from Meateater, host Cal's Week in Review, where I get to talk about a lot of conservation type of things. And this is a conservation type of thing that deals with clean water, cold water, and lots of fish. So we'll start with some quick introductions. And as I introduce these fantastic folks, they'll give us a quick who they or what they do and why they're here. So we'll start with Julia Peebles from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. Thanks, Cal, for hosting this. I wouldn't call myself a super expert on the issue. I'm more of the brains with the congressional side of things. I am the government relations manager for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and is based in Washington, D.C. So I'm going to rely pretty heavily on these great panelists that we have here, partners that we work closely with who are located in the region. But, you know, we're here because we love, we're in huge support of Simpson's, the Northwest in Transition proposal that he has out there. You know, currently salmon and steelhead populations continue to decline. And I think this proposal provides some certainty, not only for recovering salmon and steelhead populations, but for the local community as well. So happy to be here. Thanks, Cal.
Thank you. And Aaron Lieberman from Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association.
Thanks, Cal. My name is Aaron Lieberman, and I'm the executive director of the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association. For folks on here who don't know what that is, the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association is a 501c6 nonprofit business trade association established in 1954 in Salmon, Idaho, representing outfitters and guides across the state, and dedicated to the enhancement of quality outdoor experiences on and the conservation of Idaho's lands, waters, wildlife. I'm here and we care about this because a significant proportion of outfitters and guides in Idaho and our members are fishing guides, and not least fishing guides, but anadromous fishing guides, and both in their livelihoods and the communities where they live. These fish have been and are especially now a central part of who they are and how they make their living, and bring them back, as well as bring them back while also addressing some pretty significant concerns in the overall Northwest energy and transportation system is a unique opportunity.
Thank you, Aaron. And Brian Brooks with Idaho Wildlife Federation.
Thanks, Cal. I'm the executive director of the Idaho Wildlife Federation. We are the state's oldest and largest coalition of sportsman organizations. We were founded in 1936. We represent 29 affiliated organizations across the state. And my organization has been working on salmon and steelhead since the 1930s. And there's been a number of issues that have been impacting them for a number of decades, and we'll get into that. I started working on this issue in 2016 professionally, but I grew up fishing for salmon and steelhead. So even if I didn't have this position with the Federation, I'd still be a champion for recovering these species. They're really special to folks. And so I represent a lot of the advocacy on this issue from the sport fisherman side from the state of Idaho. And just want to thank everybody for being here tonight. The folks watching from home, appreciate it. It's a complex issue, and we're gonna figure out how to fix our salmon and steelhead situation if we all start tuning in now. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. And last but not least, Eric Crawford from Trout Unlimited.
Thanks, Cal. As Cal said, Eric Crawford, I'm the North Idaho Field Coordinator for Trout Unlimited, perpetuating our work with conserving, protecting, and restoring cold water fisheries throughout North America, none the least here in the Snake River Basin. Trout Unlimited took a pretty strong position all the way back in 1997 that to recover these fish, we needed to remove the 4 lower Snake River dams. And without that, they would be on a perpetual track towards extinction. And so my work focuses on salmon and steelhead policy, outreach, and engagement throughout the Snake River Basin. And I'm hopeful tonight that we'll be able to cover many of your questions and definitely give you a perspective from not only the sporting community, but the economics, and then as well as recreation. So again, we really appreciate everybody's attendance tonight and really looking forward to this evening. And again, very grateful that all of you are tuning in. So we thank you. And Cal?
You seemed a little urgent to sign off there, Eric. You're going to have to do a lot of talking tonight. So this is a big proposal. $34 billion type of big proposal. I think it'd be great to start out with getting an idea of the scope beyond that. Julia, can you tell us the area affected?
Yeah, so, I'm going to break it down in congressional districts. That's just what I do. I'm a walk for Congress. But, if we really focus on just the Snake River and where it's located geographically, I would say all districts in Idaho. There's only 2 congressional districts. I would say District 2 in Oregon, which is represented by Rep. Binns. His predecessor was Greg Walden. And then I would say for Washington districts 4 and 5, which is represented by Congressman Newhouse and Congresswoman McMorris Rogers. So those are like geographically the Snake River, but I would say as a whole, I think that all the delegations, the Idaho delegation, Oregon delegation, the Washington delegation, as well as the Montana delegation, which is impacted by this proposal through power, should all be at the table. Part of these conversations, not only the House members, but our U.S. senators and our local elected officials are part of this. And I know we're just talking about what's affected in the region, but I do want to highlight that, this should be a national issue, especially for sportsmen and women. We have come to the table and stepped up multiple times at conserving priority fish habitat, including conserving Bristol Bay in Alaska. That is home to the world's largest remaining wild salmon fishery. And Trout Unlimited can attest to that. They've done amazing work up there. But I just want to say that this issue is no different, not only in the Snake River, but as the Columbia River Basin as a whole.
Oh, thank you. This is not a new issue. Maybe new to some folks, and I do have to say I'm very impressed with everyone signing in from all across the country. This is our resource as a country. This isn't just the Northwest in transition. This is the transition, across the U.S. and it's heartwarming to see that so many folks are tuning in from all over. That being said, this has been debated before. The idea of taking out these mega structures, monumental feats being removed, that folks worked really hard to put in. Brian Brooks, can you kind of let everybody know, why is this coming back around? For a lot of folks, this has been a dead issue. The issue's been put to bed. Why are we talking about this now? Eric, you said that Trout Unlimited took their position back in the 90s. We're moving pretty slow. Why now?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Just coming out with the fastballs. I like it. First, I think, yeah, if you think about the situation, and we've talked about this for decades. The fish were listed in the 90s. Since the dams went in on the Lower Snake River in the 70s, we've been seeing a constant extinction trajectory. And there have been multiple times where cries for breaching the dams have been put to bed. So I think a lot of people are wondering, why are we talking about this again? And the answer is pretty simple. There is a very new, very real variable that has been applied to the whole system that impacts fish, grain, and other commodity transport and power generation. And I think a lot of people have understood that there's been a decline in fish, and we'll talk about how the dams are linked to that decline. But what most people really do not understand, and how we need to start looking at Simpson's proposal, it's a way to address these other two crises that are happening, and that is a shortage that we've seen in shipping through the dams. That's the first one. We've seen shipping is down about 75% through the Lower Snake River dams. We're not seeing a drop in the tonnage or the volume of product being shipped from Idaho. It's just moving away from the river. And there's a number of reasons that's happening. But there are towns like Rosalia, Washington, in Eastern Washington, really small town that just built their own grain terminal and extended the rail lines. And so they're just moving away from the river and they're never coming back. So we have a significant decline in the last 20, 25 years in shipping. Now, because of that, the receipts from shipping are not paying for the maintenance and operation of the dams. Taxpayers are now footing the bill for that. The other crisis is the Bonneville Power Administration's financial position. BPA is the power company quasi-monopoly. It was set up by FDR in the New Deal to create power for the Northwest. They built projects all throughout the decades, with the last ones ending up with being the dams on the Lower Snake. And so they run the show here. And for a while, they were profitable, providing really cheap power to folks. But now they're no longer the cheapest supplier of power. They charge about $36 per megawatt hour, and their competitors charge far less than that. And what we're also seeing is, because they are charging that much, customers who purchase that power wholesale, so public utility districts, power co-ops, are bailing on them to go with the cheaper competitor, but everyone else has to share the same exact cost. So it's rising on everybody else. So what we're seeing is sort of folks leaving BPA behind, but BPA is also on the hook for all of this salmon and steelhead mitigation funding. And because of that, they are now about $17 billion in debt. That's federal debt that you and I own. They're 2 years away from reaching their federal borrowing cap, which is not a very popular thing to do in Congress. And they've blown through almost $1 billion in their cash reserves, cash they had set aside. Their past administrator, Elliot Mainzer, called their financial situation a bloodbath. When the person running the show calls it a bloodbath, that is why we're talking about this again. Congress has never been very motivated to look at the dams for the sake of fish. They are very motivated to look at the dams for the sake of keeping Bonneville Power from defaulting on their loans, which they have done before. This history is repeating itself. Bonneville defaulted on $2.25 billion in 1970s money, which necessitated the passage of the 1980 Power and Planning Act, which kind of turned them into a piggy bank and put them on the line for all this fish mitigation. So the reason we're talking about this again is not simply because the environmentalists and folks who want fish back are just winning and getting more ad time. It's because Congress is really looking at this economic and financial collapse of the Bonneville Power Administration, and they're going to have to step in to do something. So this is really inevitable.
So you're saying timing does have something to do with it?
Timing has to do with everything. But the why, and it's funny because this proposal, as I said, it's a jobs and it's a infrastructure package. But taking out the earthen portions of the dam is getting all of the attention. The dams actually stay in place. You can plug them back up if you ever want to use them in the future. The concrete will stay there, but the dams are in large part causing BPA to operate in the red. And so I think when you look at all the things that we could do to help fish, and we are doing a lot already, you really have to look at it through the lens of, is this going to eradicate or reverse BPA's debt? And I'll have everybody know, in their latest strategic plan, BPA admitted that they have no way to reverse their debt. And that's not a good prospect to admit to Congress.
I do want to pick up on the job side of things, and mitigation. Truthfully, I think a lot of folks that signed in tonight definitely have those topics in mind. And as you travel as a salmon would, I guess, and fish your way all the way down the salmon and all the way into the snake, there's a lot of amazing towns, a lot of amazing small towns, but it would be hard to say that they're booming. And how does this situation where we're going to be removing barges, we're going to be removing parts of the economy, benefit the people in those small towns? I mean, where do the jobs go? Aaron, do you have anything to say on that side of things?
Oh yeah, thank you. I have all kinds of things to say. So as we travel up the river, I mean, I think the story of rural Idaho, or the story of Idaho and along these river corridors, is a lot like the story of other places around the West. So you have, historically, these areas relied on extractive industry. So more so than they do now. That still exists, but timber, mining, things like that. And as extractive industries retreated, they've come to rely more and more so, at least for the most part, and especially as you go upriver, on recreation tourism, and which is now the second largest, at 7.8 billion per year. And a huge part of that is not least outfitted outdoor rec and tourism, but centered on salmon and steelhead fishing. But getting back to it, when we're looking at, as we go up the river, you can look at a place like Lewis and Clarkston, and where most of the state has seen pretty significant economic growth, and especially in outdoor rec and tourism, Lewiston has remained relatively stagnant. I think it's like 2%. And I can't remember the time period. Brian could probably remind me. As you go upriver, the story gets a little bit more dramatic. So we start hitting places along the Clearwater and the Salmon. These are the primary drainages that these anadromous fish come down from and run back up to spawn in. And as you go up these drainages, as they moved away from timber, from mining, from those extractive industries, they shifted to fishing because they had this great resource and there's a lot of demand for it. As the fish declined, they have, those towns have suffered significantly. And so for a while there, it was pretty good. Then there are the good years and more recent years, like 2001, 2009, certain years where where sort of Mother Nature created a confluence of events, so to speak, that really helped fish get out, where we had really good runs. But for the most part, when we look at these towns, these corridors along the river, they're heavily dependent on salmon and steelhead, and as those runs go down, they really start to hurt. So, for example, in the Clearwater, 2 years ago, when the steelhead season was shut down, the Clearwater drainage, Clearwater County lost about $8.6 million per month. So 43 odd some $1 million over the 4-month season. I guess the overall statement being that beyond cultural identity, beyond the ecological importance of fish, in these river corridors, there's the confluence of, it's another way to look at the confluence of the story that Brian's talking about. So when he talks about, BPA and lack of competitiveness and changing energy markets, there's a similar sort of transition happening that's been happening in river corridors, where these fish continue to go, or first we had extractive industry retreat, then we had fish populations continue to decline, and those communities that have relied on it have suffered more and more as a result. Did I get your question there, Kyle? I feel like I lost myself in the story map.
It sounds like you're committed to your constituency.
That's for sure. Yeah.
I think you did.
Is that a gentle way of saying I did lose it? That's okay.
No, you did good. You did good. Thank you. So, and Eric, this is kind of an Eric Aaron question here. You know, what happens to the fishing part and the guided fishing part when these dams start to be removed? Are we going to see a lag in fish numbers, or which would mean a decline in guided fishing as well?
I'll let Eric speak to the first part.
Yeah. So I think the first thing to really recognize, Cal, is the fact that in Idaho, and for that matter, the vast majority of the main Columbia, that fishing exists on hatchery stocks. We don't fish for, I mean, you incidentally do catch wild stock fish. So wild steelhead, wild chinook, that does occur incidentally, but all of our fishing is regulated to hatchery produced fish. And so, which has been going on for decades. And that, I think, is part of the confusion of what's going on now. We look at these run numbers and think, oh, geez, they're fine. But in reality, it doesn't approach the recovery goals. And so in Representative Simpson's proposal, there actually is mitigation in there for outfitting and guiding, and sets up a fund to offset potential losses there. And so, but it is feasible. I think the thing for people to realize is that because of the life history of salmon and steelhead, that they, particularly wild fish and exclusively wild fish, that they spend a varying number of years in fresh water before they outmigrate even to the ocean. And then they spend a varying number of years in the ocean. So anywhere from 1 to 4 in fresh to sometimes, depending on the species, up to 6 years in salt. And so you have this offset return, and that's what perpetuates these runs. If you do have a poor run return year, 1 year, you have part of that individual generation still existing. And that's just natural Mother Nature building in resiliency to those species. And so is it feasible? Yes, that they could, you could see some lost opportunity in between removal. It is, but done right and at the right time of the year. A lot of it depends on outmigrating smolts and then what kind of conditions the adults will have on the return. But I think Aaron can speak to, loss of opportunity, particularly from the outfitting and guiding community, and what Representative Simpson has proposed in the concept.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. But before I do, Eric, would you mind speaking to, because I think a question that folks have oftentimes is, will they, not will there be a break where there may not be as much opportunity for sport fishing, or where there may even be a closure to some degree of sport fishing, but whether once that period of time passes, will these fish return in significant numbers or in higher numbers than they previously did? And
yeah.
Sorry, just go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that really comes back to, why the Snake River Basin is the most important place for recovery of these species. I mean, yeah, there is a convergence of factors right now, as Brian just spoke to, but in reality, the Snake River Basin produces historically 50% of all salmonids return into the mouth of the Columbia, which historically those numbers totaled between 10 and 16 million fish, 10 to 16 million fish, with 50% returning to the Snake River Basin. The good news is that much of the Snake River Basin is still intact regarding rearing and spawning habitat. So roughly 62% of the historic spawning rearing habitat is accessible, which is pretty impressive. And then you couple that with, for those of you that really understand geography and the scope of Idaho, when you really start looking at where that habitat lies, it is 30% or so of it lies within designated wilderness or designated wild and scenic rivers. So we're talking about huge drainages, like the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the Lochsaw, the Selway, huge drainages. So as far as a habitat rearing opportunity, it's here. You know, I equate it to, and don't get confused here, I am happily married, but I think this is a good way to look at it, is that, you know, I've been set up with a blind date, and it's at the best restaurant in town. The table's set, beautiful silver, beautiful china, nice bottle of wine, but my date just doesn't show up. And literally, that's what's happening night after night in the Snake River Basin, is that my date's not showing up. Even though the place settings are there, our salmon and steelhead aren't making it back. And so it really comes back to really thinking about, you know, people definitely are confused by the opportunity that is afforded to us, and that's on hatchery stocks. You know, and I mentioned that there is no harvest on wild fish. The harvest of wild Chinook ended all the way in the mid 70s, and followed by summer steelhead wild harvest in approximately 1986. And so, I mean, we haven't been harvesting wild fish. It's just been this hatchery conundrum, and that's where people really get confused. But at the end of the day, it's ripe for the picking. It's ripe for spawning. You know, as some people refer to Idaho's for spawners, similar to Virginia's for lovers. You know. I think that that's a pretty good analogy. And I think that as far as opportunity goes and what may be missing, you know, potentially Simpson has addressed that.
Yeah. And sorry, Cal, I was going to add on the outfitted part, but if you want to move on to a different one, we can do that.
Oh, go for it.
Well, I was just going to say briefly. So part of the question was, you know, could there be a period of time where fishery is impacted, and then, you know, what are the possible returns for outfitters? How would each of those affect them? So as you mentioned, as Eric mentioned, there is a sport fishing contingency fund, so-called, in the plan, and the idea there is that there could be. So they're taking measures to make sure this doesn't happen if the plan were to go forward. But there could be a period of time where sport fishing could be closed. And were that to happen, I mean, outfitters, guides, and the sport fishing economy more broadly is critically important to rural Idaho. And so it would be pretty critical that those businesses and those economies have some way to sustain themselves in any such period. If it didn't happen and it weren't needed, then it wouldn't be used and it'd be reverted. That's also written in. So it's not just this piggy bank that goes to outfitters and guides, as some would like to characterize it. It's on the outside possibility that had to happen. I think more to the point, it's what does the possibilities Eric spoke to of increased returns mean for rural Idaho? I mean, even in down years, we're talking about an industry just with salmon and steelhead alone that brings in $240 to $300 million per year of Idaho's $1.2 billion sport fishing receipts. That's annual. About 150 to 200 million of that is attributable to outfitted and guided. And actually, that could be a separate number because generally they don't wrap us in. I have some numbers in Oregon and Washington too, but just to really ground what it could mean in small town Pacific Northwest, which is the kind of place I'm from. In Riggins in 2001, and I can adjust these for inflation if we want, but in 2001, in a single limited spring Chinook season, I brought in $10 million that in 2001 dollars, and about $13.5 million in 2018 dollars. That represented about 26% of Riggins' total gross receipts that year. Riggins is the town of less than 400 people, and actually over 80% of Idaho's outfitters and guides live in communities with an average population of 500 or fewer. So it's all to say that so that's 2001. It was a pretty good year. I mean, by most people would call it a great year, a banner year. It's still, and I think as Eric spoke to, a fraction of what the numbers were even in the 1960s. I mean, we're looking at what, Eric, 45, 50,000 spring Chinook coming back in the 1950s, 1960s. So
yeah, and I think that, you know, even in the goals that were set by the Columbia Basin Partnership, for example, the high-end goal for spring and summer Chinook was 127,000 fish returning back to the Snake River Basin. That is 9% or 19% of the historical number. So as many fish as that sounds like, that's just a fraction of the historical number. And right now, and those are wild numbers. And right now we're looking at, you know, around 7,000 spring and summer Chinook wild fish that are returning to the Snake River Basin. And so But I think more to this point that we're talking about, here's the fact of the matter, as we noted earlier, is that the steelhead season was closed in 2019 on the Clearwater. We are looking at a very small opportunity for spring Chinook in the Snake River Basin in Idaho this year. Most of the fisheries will be closed with the exception of one, and that's the Rapid River Return there in Reagan. So even when we have all this, we don't even have the opportunity to fish for them.
I have one comment I wanted to make on top of that. We hear a lot, well, what about those 2001, 2009 seasons? Record years, we had the dams in place. How can the dams be the problem? It's really important to remember that those are not near record years. I hear people bring that up all the time. It was a fraction of what our goals actually were. And so, and the other thing to realize too is that was 2 years out of 30. We had great snow, great spring water, and great ocean conditions. It was a perfect storm. But I think folks just need to remember that we didn't even reach our recovery goals in those years, and they were not near the records that were pre-dam. They were just the highest that we had had since the dam's construction. Really important. I hear that all the time. Want to throw that in there.
I'd like to jump over to Julia really quick. One of the questions that I saw zip by was, do we have any co-sponsors coming forward?
As of now, it's just the conversation starting. This proposal has been released for just over a month now. We keep asking people to come to the table, right? You can't be part of the conversation if you're not at the table. So I think that's really where we are. At this point, I've seen statements of support that come out. One example, our Senator Cantwell and Murray from Washington did a joint statement with Senators Wyden and Merkley of Oregon, saying that they want to engage, right? They want to be engaged on this process. That's great. But I haven't seen an actionable item come out of that at the same time. So why is that? I mean, at the end of the day, maybe it's because it has only been a month and a half. And as we all know, things move pretty slowly in Congress. And they might still be processing it. For our BHA related meetings that we have, and kudos to our Washington chapter for leading some of these meetings. We've met with representatives and they said, yeah, we're working with our delegation on addressing this because they see it as a significant proposal, right? They just don't know how to approach Simpson at this point of what this looks like. So that's also part of navigating this, but so it takes time. And, as I say, it takes time, but we are, time is limited, as we know with Congress. Brian did mention infrastructure as a possible vehicle for this moving forward. And while that timeline has pushed to this fall, it's still not a lot of time. After the COVID-19 package was signed into law, members of Congress are like, what's next? What's next? Let's put this infrastructure package together. What does it look like? Is it economic stimulus measures? Is it infrastructure? Is it transportation? All of that. So that's also on the table. So there's I guess the easy way of answering that is that there's no co-sponsors at this point, but there's also no legislation. It's just a concept. We need the bill to be introduced. Once it's introduced, it will be referred to committee of jurisdiction, go through the hearing process of being considered, then hopefully being passed and included in a larger package at the end of the day.
Thank you. Very informative. If, as this conversation goes on, as you said, if folks become interested, they want to get behind this and they want their representatives to get behind this, what's the best way to get those folks engaged?
Yeah, and anyone can answer this, but you'll see the take action button at the very bottom of your screen. Click it. It's a way for you to join our efforts in asking your elected officials, not only members of Congress, but your local elected officials, to be engaged and come to the table to have these conversations. Is a great way of doing that. And then I think all of our organizations also have our separate movement that you can contact us. Hoping we'll send out our contact information after this, but we're doing multiple ways of engaging. So that could be an op-ed in your local newspaper if you want to offer that. You can call the Capitol switchboard, which you guys might have, I have it memorized, but I'm not going to bother you with those details at this point. Can do the same with your state legislatures, your governor's office, what have you. I think Simpson's website is a huge resource. Going there and just learning the framework of the proposal, it's a lot to take in, I think is also something you can do. But I mentioned all those things as a way for you as the viewers and the audience to get engaged, because, you know, there's a sense of urgency, and I can't emphasize this enough. They want to hear from you, your elected officials, on a federal level, on a local level. They don't want to hear from a DC lobbyist who is not located in the region. You are the constituent. You are the one going to be impacted by this proposal if it moves forward and being introduced as legislation. And, you know, you're the constituent being represented and by you. So, or they're representing you, I guess I should say. So it's, I can't emphasize that enough. It's really important. So please take action at the tab below.
Thank you. Well said. This is to the group. Why are we thinking Idaho dams first? Jacob, you've been waiting very patiently for a long time. Thank you. Doesn't it make more sense to remove the Columbia dams?
I'll take the first stab. So
it's a tiny question.
Yeah, it is. It's very small. We'll get through it very quickly and move on. But no, in all seriousness, I mean, it comes back to what I was just saying earlier, right? So they are the link to massive spawning and rearing habitat that is intact and accessible. There's no point in really removing other dams. One, the lower Columbia dams, which Brian will address this, are very, very large producers of electricity still. And I'll let Brian talk to that. But when we talk about other dams within the Snake River Basin, the Hells Canyon Complex, or Dorshak even, each of those complexes serve different purposes. Leafs have not. With the Hells Canyon Complex, the habitat is not in the same condition as what we see throughout the rest of the basin. So those fish would still have to jump over 8 dams or get through 8 dams, the 4 on the lower Columbia, the 4 on the lower Snake, and then still have the same impacts. And the same thing goes with Dorshak. If you were to remove that, yeah, it would open 150 miles of prime B-run steelhead habitat, but they still face the same situation that they face. And so that's why the 4 lower Snake dams are so important, is because it's this gateway, as I said, to this beautiful dining experience or spawning experience for steelhead and salmon. But I think Brian can really talk to you what the lower Columbia River dams provide as economical and power abundance.
Yeah, thanks for the tee up. This is a question we get all the time, and it's a really good question. Why these dams? Why not any of the other dams? And there's 2 reasons. I think the first one I'm going to talk about is their impact on fish. When smolts, we can talk about hatchery fish when they're released, or when they wild fish naturally are flushed out with the spring freshet. They meet the dams, and because we trap fish, wild fish, and then for hatchery fish, we put pit tags in them. There are these electronic arrays everywhere in the Columbia Basin. We spend a lot of money to track where these fish go and where they die. And so we know where these fish are being kind of pulled out of the system and where they're dying. And first of all, when fish enter the Columbia, the hydro system, the Snake and the Columbia River dams, all 8, 1 and 2 Idaho fish will be wiped out. So half of Idaho's fish are killed in the hydro system. The Snake River dams have a disproportionately larger effect on the mortality than the Columbia River. That has to deal with water temperature, with water speed. Water transport time is basically the time it takes for smolts to get downstream. It used to take a few days for fish to get from Idaho to the ocean. It can take upwards of on average, about 20 to 30 days, but some years it takes about 40 days for a fish that's this big, and it needs to get to the estuary to start feeding. So that's a big killer. And of course, there's predators that thrive in these lake-like environments: bass, pike minnow, walleye. There's pelicans and other birds that thrive in those kind of lake-like environments. So it's not just the dams; it's also the secondary things that these dams, in the reservoirs that are killing these fish. And the water's a bit hotter there too, and so those fish, they go to the ocean, they come back. And they die again. There's another impact on the adults returning, killed just by the stress caused by going up these ladders, the fish ladders. Somebody had said, like, why can't we put fish ladders on these dams? There are fish ladders on these dams, but most of the mortality caused by the dams is on their smoltward migration, when they're little babies headed to the ocean. So that's really important to remember when we're talking about, well, we have fish ladders, why can't we just make them better? Fish ladders don't impact the smolt. So there's a biological reason why those dams are kind of targeted. But as I had said before, that the economic reason has caught up to the biological reason. These dams, if you compare them to the dams on the lower Columbia, they produce a lot, significantly less power. The 4 dams put together, on average, between 2019 to 2004, 15 years, produced about 960 megawatts of power. 53% of that, over half of it, is produced between March and June, when there's very little power consumption. And in the peak times of the year, when the power is needed most, in December and January to heat homes, and again in July and August to cool homes, that's when they produce the smallest amount of power. So when they're producing excess amount of power, it has to go somewhere. And that's surplus power is what we call it. And it's often sold at a loss to places like California. It has to go somewhere. So it's kind of one of the economic reasons of why these dams are losing money for BPA, and why they are targeted. And the other reasons, of course, is that they don't provide any other sort of ancillary economic benefits. They're not water storage facilities like the Hells Canyon complex or Dworshak or the dams in Montana, and especially the dams on the upper Columbia in Canada. All of those dams provide water storage, which is really valuable for irrigation and for flood control. The 4 lower Snake River dams do not provide any flood control. That is straight from BPA. And it's because, in the summer when we really need that power, there's just this, the spring freshet has already moved through. So we don't have a lot of storage in those dams to, pick up the power generating capacity when we really need it. So it's kind of unreliable power there in the peak months when we really need it. And so they have a few economic things that are working against them. And so when you look at dams that we should target to help fish or to help BPA, it's not going to be the ones that provide all of these services. It's going to be the ones that are losing money most of the year, and the ones that don't provide flood control and other human services.
Have we explored all of the options? Have we exhausted the options of keeping these dams in place? Right now, we have seen,
Yes.
We've had some hatchery failures. I haven't seen anybody come up with, well, why don't we just make more fish? Why aren't we doing that? We have a serious growing, and I think most people would agree, new pinniped problem that's not perceived. Why don't we, Rish passed a bill that allowed for a certain amount of lethal removal of pinnipeds.
Yep.
Why aren't we talking more about that? Cormorants, predators stacking up on the Columbia.
Yeah. And so that was a lot there, Cal. So break it down here one at a time.
I was going to suggest that you take at least hatchery production, Eric. I would love to talk about that.
Let's talk predators first.
Yeah, for sure. So when we talk about predators, there's a whole gamut, of course, of things that eat juvenile salmon and steelhead throughout the basin. None the least, the current Snake River system, the lower Snake River system, and much of the Columbia has created a reservoir lake environment, which is benefiting smallmouth bass and introduced, in addition to introduced walleye. which all of us that are anglers readily know what both of those species eat on, and it's not generally bugs, it's other fish. And so they take a pretty serious detriment. There are many walleye anglers that believe the next world record will come out of the lower Columbia. That's how productive of a walleye fishery that is. Then we get to the avian predators. It occurs mostly on the lower Columbia, and that's a result of man-made causes. For those of you not familiar, Sand Island is a huge tern rookery, and it's created from dredging from the lower Columbia. So it has set up this really great opportunity for them not only to reproduce, but a feeding frenzy, a buffet line, if you will, as smolts are out migrating, have been injured, or are just sick from their travel downriver. They're just prime targets for avian predators. Then we get to, as you just noted, pinnipeds. And so, yeah, you're correct. A huge shout out to Senator Risch and his amendment in 2018 to the Marine Mammal Protection Act. The current exception to the act allows up to 540 California sea lions to be lethally removed from below Bonneville Dam over the next 5 years. And that's in addition to 176 Steller sea lions in that same time period. So a very high number of pinnipeds can be removed. The fact of the matter is, pinnipeds are in the numbers that they arrive at Bonneville now, which I think people have to realize that's 45 miles from the salt, how far up they're coming to Columbia to get to Bonneville. Again, that's a man-made issue. Those fish would not stack up there if it were not for finding their way to the ladder. So there are situations where we can affect these numbers, whether it's lethal removal of pinnipeds, California seals, and Steller sea lions. But in addition, there are no limits on bass and walleye throughout the entire drainage. If you want to go have a heyday and catch some white-fleshed fish and chow down, that's your opportunity. Terns, a little bit different of a situation, but there are things being done to mitigate those impacts. But I think the fact of the matter is that we've had 40 years to right this wrong. We have, as Brian was kind of alluding to, with pit tags and coated wire tags that are placed in these fish high up in the basin. That is all part of a 33-year comparative survival study that's occurred in the basin. 33 years of intense scientific study to determine how best to get better survival out of these fish. And where are we? I just mentioned that there's not going to be a springer fishery in the vast majority of the Snake River Basin this year. We're already seeing reduced opportunity on steelhead. And so as though those look like great remedies for the situation, it ends up being all for naught. Never mind the cost. Annually, Lower Snake Comp, which is the compensation fund that Bonneville Power pays into in the Snake River Basin, is funded at the rate of $31 million. Like, this stuff is not free. We talk about, well, how is somebody going to be mitigated for the loss of some other opportunity? Nothing's free right now. It's huge. Whether it's $31 million funding hatchery systems, and that's just the Lower Snake Comp systems, never mind what Idaho Power pays into the Hells Canyon Complex mitigation plans or the Mitchell-Ack hatcheries. Never mind the $17 billion that's been spent throughout the basin already in mitigation efforts, whether it's habitat restoration or other mitigation efforts. I mean, in the end, it's not working.
Well, and Eric, I think that's, another point that comes up is that I've heard a lot recently is we're already too far in debt in this country. Why would we spend money on a plan that isn't even, and unfortunately that wouldn't even recover salmon and steelhead? And I think what you just spoke to is the fact that we've tried literally everything else, and that unequivocally, longitudinally across the years, the single thing, including the 2020 EIS, that scientists agree stands the best chance to recover salmon and steelhead, Idaho stocks of salmon and steelhead, is dam removal. And so, but beyond that, the question, the other part that I was speaking to is people say, well, we can't spend this money. We're just going further and further in debt. This is just another government handout. And I think you just kind of hit it there. It's like, we are already doing that. We are already spending. We are subsidizing a bloated federal bureaucracy in the movement of electrons that has not been competitive, as Brian pointed out, for many years now, and who are spiraling down. And it's not completely on them, because they have been saddled with fish mitigation, and it's an impossible situation. They're required to pay more and more to not recover fish, and that is making them less and less competitive. Which is the key.
A great place to jump in, and you'll get your shot.
Go ahead.
I think when we look at this as a larger piece of the puzzle, right? And we start considering green energy, even though these dams are contributing not very much, they are part of a diverse power grid, and hydro is considered green energy. Is this a step sideways? Is this a step backwards? What has to replace this energy? And, I'm sure I'm not the only one who got the press release saying, what are the trade-offs? What's going to happen when all these restrictions are lifted to allow the deconstruction or the sidestepping of these dams? Is coal power going to come in? Is something dirtier going to come in? What are the trade-offs? And is this plan considerate of green or hopefully clean energy?
First, let me
try to tackle that one, Eric.
Yeah, I'll let you tackle it. But first, Cal, I think the statement of green energy is kind of a misnomer. You're right. Hey, it's renewable. Yeah, absolutely. But it's not clean. When you kill 50% of all salmonids out migrating, and then a portion of the returning adults, there's nothing green about that. And so I think that's something to keep in mind. But I'll let Brian address the rest of it.
I was going to say that. Yeah, there you go again. No, it's a great question, because we keep hearing, well, if we take out the dams, we're going to have to create this many coal power plants. It's kind of weird that that's where critics of this proposal go straight to, like, the dirtiest, like the worst, kind of thing surrounding it. But that's not what's in Simpson's plan, and that's not necessarily what we need to commit to. So I do think that's a good way to transition into talking about what breaching the dams looks like, because it's really important for people to know that these are not deadbeat dams. They have value. They don't produce a whole lot of power, 950 megawatts on average per year for the last 15 years. It's not the most amount of power. We can replace that. But what's important to know is that they provide base load power. Basically, when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, those reservoirs act as a battery. So you can just basically flip on a switch and those immediately start pushing water out those turbines. So that's the value of those dams. They basically act as a battery. So to kind of replace the services that those dams provide, there's two, right? There's transportation, there's power, but let's just stick to power for now. Simpson's proposal includes replacing the power that those dams provide 3 times over with baseload power sources, and he has proposed modular nuclear reactors as well as pump storage. And pump storage is a way to pump water uphill, and then when it sits in a reservoir away from the river system, when you need it, you can flush it downhill and turn turbines. It's hydropower, but it's manufactured in a reservoir. Modular nuclear is being developed right now, and we have the Idaho National Laboratory in Idaho as one of the sort of facilities leading the way in this country to make these scalable and economical for the region. So we'll replace, and it's also important to remember in Simpson's plan, nothing is the dams are not going to be breached. Nothing the dams provide is going to be touched until the services they provide are replaced. So we're going to build the power generation facilities. We're going to build the rail lines, infrastructure before the dams are ever touched. So I think a lot of people think that you're just going to leave my community high and dry, and there's going to be this, I always call it a Mad Max scenario where, everyone's going to be driving around looking for scarce resources and wearing leather. But that's not the case. These things will be replaced. And so modular nuclear, and the pump storage, and I believe there might be a few other sources that are intermittent but will add. And he's also talking about battery storage. And Simpson and other representatives and senators are very close to the people that are developing the cutting edge of battery storage. Right now, we can't really store that much battery power, about 4 hours of what the dams can provide right now. But in 10 years, batteries will do things that we had no idea that they were capable of. It's like the difference between a dial-up Nokia brick phone and an iPhone that we have now. Things are going to be very different in 10 years, but it does replace that power, that baseload power, 3 times over. And while we're at it, one of the other things that the plan proposes is to reconstruct rail lines and enhance the existing infrastructure that is there for loading the grain. I say that shipping is down 75%, which is true, but the remaining product, about 90% of it is grain. So that system is incredibly valuable to grain growers. We can't discount that. And frankly, I don't think anybody wants to put grain growers through what our fish reliant communities are going through right now. We don't want to leave them high and dry, and we don't want to leave them behind in the economic fight for the future. So we really need to replace that service, but that is possible. And Simpson's plan actually makes it so shipping grain will be cheaper. So the profit margins will be larger for the grain industry and grain growers, but we need to build better, and engineer rail lines. But I'll tell you what, building rail lines is about a 300-year-old technology. It's a lot easier to build those than it was to build the dams.
Where does the money come from? How are we going to pay for all this?
Well,
it sounds we get all sorts of new stuff.
That is a great question. Let me take the most roundabout way I can, and really succinctly though. We have paid $17 billion so far for fish mitigation to no avail. It is the most expensive species recovery effort in world history. And here we are flatlining, nearing extinction. In another 20 years, we will have spent another 17 billion, so 34 billion total on failed fish recovery efforts, or at least efforts that have not worked to get our fish back yet. That's the same price tag as Simpson's proposal. So Cal, to answer your point, it's going to come from the same source that it's coming from now. But instead of failing, we'll get new infrastructure, new power. We'll get the battery research facility in Lewiston. There's a whole lot more in this proposal. But at least, so it'll come from the same source, but it will pay for infrastructure that will be fish friendly, and will be modernized, and it'll provide, again, infrastructure for grain growers, and that says nothing about the decades of jobs and high paying jobs that this proposal is going to produce for decades to come.
Julia, do you want to expand on where the money comes from?
Yeah, so like Brian was referencing, it is a long-term investment, right? It's something, that it's going to be paying for itself eventually in the future. But I mean, should this proposal be introduced as legislation, there are several possibilities out there. I don't have the crystal ball right now, but we're talking about an infrastructure package that could be, the vehicle for this proposal or for the legislation once it's introduced. Or you can utilize the reconciliation process, which we saw through the COVID-19 measures that recently were enacted into law. With that said, I think infrastructure is more doable. I think it's something we can do if we have legislation that comes in a couple of months, but I don't expect something to be considered on the floor until this fall. they're kind of using, Congress loves deadlines, so they're kind of using the surface transportation expiration date, which is September 30th. So while I say surface transportation, that is really, I think they're using that package as surface transportation, water infrastructure, highway bill is the same as surface transportation, but economic stimulus as a whole. So I expect that to come this fall and be considered on the floor. As for the reconciliation process that I referenced, that could be the area where we get the funding for the $34 billion. But there are limitations to the reconciliation process, right? So it could provide that $34 billion needed to fund the proposal. And that's if instructions, I know I'm going to get a little wonky, but if instructions that are included in the fiscal year 2022 budget resolution, instructions to the relevant committees of jurisdiction to find a way to divvy up this money, they can do that. However, reconciliation process does not authorize the use of funds. So you can have this bucket of funds, but there's no way where it can go. So at the end of the day, that would need an infrastructure package. So just something to keep in mind as we keep these conversations going of like, what is the best vehicle moving forward and what have you. But it is, what happened last Congress, I'll just reference this, is the elephant in the room was what are the pay-fors? How are we paying for this infrastructure package? So as you may remember last Congress, like everyone was having infrastructure week, everyone was aware of what infrastructure was. Is it resilient? What's gray infrastructure, what have you. But the question was, how are we going to pay for this large package? So it is the elephant in the room, and I think reconciliation process and creating a package on that could be the answer, not only for the $33.5 billion for this legislation if it's introduced, but you also have to think about everyone else, right? Everyone wants a piece of the pie and wants some money going to their legislative priorities. So, that's a long-winded way of just saying, like, I don't know, like the answers aren't there yet. People are still trying to negotiate what the reconciliation package will look like. We need to wait for, President Biden's fiscal year 2022 budget request to come out, then to work on a budget resolution. We can go down this rabbit hole of theorizing and discussing the what ifs and the ins and outs of Congress and how the sausage is made. But I think at the end of the day, what we're here and what we're doing is we want a bill to be introduced. And if that's through an infrastructure, and we want it to move and become law. So if that's through an infrastructure package, great. But what we're looking at from my perspective is, once it's introduced, I'm going to find any vehicle that is moving, that is viable, that I think will make it to the president's desk for a signature, and try to get a ride on that. Long-winded way of the funding question, but.
No, thank you. That was very informative. I thought I'd like to maybe spend a little time thinking about the future as we start winding down our clock. And this would be an open one to the group. Maybe Brian, you'll come in here, and Eric as well. But is there going to be an actual breaching of the dams? Like, how is this executed? Can we get like pay-per-view, big explosion, raise some money that way?
Well, I think I think most people would be pretty disappointed to learn how it would actually go down. If you are familiar with any of the 4 lower Snake River dams, there is generally a large powerhouse structure, and then the lock system. And that's usually from either river right or river left to about mid-channel. The rest of the section is all earthen. And literally, maybe it'd be like getting your CDL and renting a D9 for a while, a couple hours, and that's how you raise money. But like, that's as simple as this is removing an earthen portion. There's no explosives. The concrete portion of the powerhouses in Simpson's proposal right now are to remain in place. And so it would be fairly anticlimactic, unfortunately.
So there's room to improve there.
Well, yeah, let's brainstorm after tonight, and we can figure out some ways to make it more entertaining.
It could be
I've got
sexier for sure.
I got some Roman candles back over here.
I mean, maybe it should be, we should sell rocks, rocks and
like moon rocks.
like, oh, mine's going to be 45th rock pulled, and if your number's pulled on the 45th time, you win the money. I don't know.
And do we have an idea of, what the downstream effects of fisheries will be? I mean, we're talking a lot about salmon and steelhead, but Eric, you and I talk a lot about trying to find big sneaky walleye and big smallmouth bass, and we know that there is a lot of sediment. Whenever water slows down, sediment settles to the bottom. What happens with what is sitting in these slow sections now?
Yeah, so not being a hydrologist by any means, but if you really think about the process, so there would be a slow drawdown, right? And so it wouldn't be, for those of you that are familiar with the removal of LWA, there was a drawdown, but there was a removal of the concrete structure, but there was still a lot of standing water behind LWA. And when it blew, there is a huge mass of water. This, you can do a controlled drawdown as it begins to reclaim its channel, rather than just this explosive push of all this sediment. Yeah, sure, there's going to be a lot of sediment movement, and that'll have to be, and even in Simpson's proposal, there is portions that mitigate for sedimentation. And so, it would change that system from what it is, a slow moving reservoir system where smallmouth and walleye are abundant, and it would change it back to a free flowing river. It's a total of 140 miles. As Aaron has tuned me up, it's 63 named rapids which is pretty incredible, beyond just fisheries and experiences recreationally. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but I didn't draw a single river permit this year. And so I just like to think that maybe, hey, this is going to be an unpermitted river section, or it'll just be more permits to draw from. I don't know, but I mean, there's a lot of options there.
And I would like to talk about some of these other recreational benefits specific to the river. Aaron, obviously it sounds like there's some whitewater potential here, aside from, hopefully larger returns of salmon and steelhead.
Yeah, there is, and I am excited about the rapids, genuinely, personally. But before that, can I talk about you? So Cal, you started off a moment ago saying you wanted to talk about the future, and we were talking about costs. Can I just touch on something there quickly?
Yeah, please.
So I think all of this, we zoom back out, all of this is a question about how much things cost, what they cost us in different ways, right? And the current system, as folks have spoken to, and Cal, you asked, well, who's paying for this? Where's this money come from? And you spoke to, in quite literal terms, where that could happen. But I think the thing to remember is that we are in many literal and figurative ways already paying for this. We're already paying these costs. So if you're part of a rural electric, which many folks across Idaho, across PUD, across the Northwest are, then about a 30-year bill is going for the benefit of having fewer fish. And up in a place in Idaho, they pay about $6 million BPA a year. $2 million of that is for the benefit of having fewer fish, which they also rely on economically. So beyond the lost economic opportunity that is critical to fish-dependent communities, we're also paying quite literally. And then on top of that, we're subsidizing the systems that are no longer, as Brian pointed out, with barging, and to varying degrees, that are no longer competitive, or that are no longer paying for themselves. The Port of Lewiston itself is taxpayer funded, largely. So when we talk about these costs and we talk about the future, it's easy to point at $34 billion and say, well, where the hell does that money come from? Who's going to pay for that, huh? And why should I pay for that? It's well, you're paying for it right now. and you're paying for it in ways that you don't even think about. You're paying in terms of lost opportunity. You're paying in the sense that like the kid who grows up in your town is going down to Boise or is going to Las Vegas, God save him, because there's no opportunity in the rural town that he grew up in, though he'd like to stay there. You're paying for it in the fact that traditions that you had are lost. Like in so many ways, we are paying for it. And so when we talk about the future, I really hope and I really wish that the conversation we were having regionally right now were more constructive and less combative, that we weren't just tearing each other apart limb from limb, and that we were actually talking to each other about not what we want to hold on to and what we're afraid of, but what we want the future to look like. So like in 1954, when this Challis and Idaho, most people don't know unless you're from Idaho probably, but Challis, Idaho was brought electricity in 1954. And that was because of these dams. And that was incredible. That was people looking forward, and that came from the Great New Deal. They were trying, or the New Deal. They were trying to electrify the West and spur industry, and so they did that. Well, look at us now. Now we're cowering, talking about how afraid we are about a big number that we are already paying down, versus talking to each other about what kind of future we want to build that is better for all of us. And so I don't know, I went on a rant there, but when we talk about the cost in the future, it kind of breaks my heart and also frustrates me, because we are so much better than we pretend to be around this issue. Like, we can do better. It can be good for everyone. It can be good for everyone. We just have to choose to make that true and stop being babies. Anyway, 63 buried rapids. It's a huge opportunity, and I can't wait.
Did you just black out?
Yeah, I browned out a little bit there, but 63 buried rapids, and there's huge opportunity there too. Yeah, things will change, and things will change in Lewiston. The thing is, things always change. And you know what's cool? 63 buried rapids, brand new beaches, tons of access, picnic areas. Lewiston, that area that hasn't grown economically in years. I get it. There's cruise boats. They bring $2 million to 15, depending on which report you look at, per year. As I mentioned earlier, that's what? Roughly equivalent to a single limited spring Chinook season in 2001 in a town with a population of less than 400 people. So there's a lot of opportunity in those buried rapids and that whole corridor. Not least the hunting and fishing and wildlife viewing. I heard there's birdsong back in the day before we killed them all. It sounds great. We should do that.
Speaking of killing birds, the water's going to drop and we're going to get some new land. Are we going to auction that stuff off, or what's going to happen to that?
I believe that is going to be turned into, well, the vision, if the proposal goes through as Simpson has delivered it, is it will be turned into BLM land to be designated a national recreation area, the Snake River National Recreation Area. It'll the idea is to allow jet boats. I mean, it's going to be a whitewater mecca, not relegated to non-motorized or anything like that, but it'll create land. It'll create habitat, riparian habitat, but the plan is to give it to BLM. And
just to touch on that, isn't it 14,000 acres?
Yeah.
It would be submerged land to be resurfaced, and that would become like prime habitat for big game species, prime habitat for nesting birds, also for us as, enhancing our access and opportunities on our public lands and waters.
Yeah, there were a lot of beaches before dams were constructed in Lewiston and Clarkson. There's some great old footage of folks, living it up on the banks. So that'll turn into a new greenway as well.
If the wheels of Congress were to spin unusually fast, what would be the timeline on seeing a dam or seeing all 4 dams be bypassed?
So in Simpson's proposal, he has the initial removal of 2 of the 4 set for 2030. And so, a lot of things will have to come together. None of least the Congress coming together around this issue, particularly the Northwest delegation. But as soon as 2030, we could see some pretty drastic changes for the region.
And do we have an idea of what changes we could see in regards to salmon and steelhead on the removal of those first 2 dams?
So every dam that fish pass, of course, they encounter mortality. So whether it's juvenile mortality or adult mortality. But right now, if you compare some of the lower drainages in the system, whether it's the Deschutes, which fish pass only 2 dams to get there, roughly we see SARs, which is the absolute measure of success of these species. In short, 1% SAR, that equates to if 100 smolts outmigrate and only 1 adult returns, that's 1%. That's a trajectory towards extinction. We all know that you need 2 of any species to proliferate. And so we are not at that right now within the Snake River Basin. We're at 1.09 for spring Chinook, spring and summer Chinook, and 1.55% SAR for summer steelhead. And so we're not there. But when you look downriver and you see the Deschutes, which is hovering for both species right around almost 6%. And as we work upriver to the John Day, we see a 3.6% SAR, and they pass 3 dams. And then we go up to the Yakima where they pass 4 dams, and these are current SARs. You still see a 2.7% SAR. So, you will expect a better SAR by the reduction of hydro encounters, whether that, as Brian said earlier, powerhouse encounters or the reduction in water transit time. Those are the 2 big factors that affect survival. Water transit time, of course, there's a whole bunch of variables in there. And so as you remove those dams, you can expect to see increased SARs.
Yeah, I want to add an important point because we hear this all the time. Why, what about the birds? What about the sea lions? What about the ocean conditions, the gill nets? It's really, the science has been clear. If we really want our fish back, we have to address all of the above. We call them the 4 H's: habitat, harvest, hatcheries, and hydro, and predation. When Eric talks about the SARs and we say, well, a lot of people say, well, we just got those sea lions under control, we could bring back Idaho's fish. It's really important to remember that the Yakima River, Deschutes, John Day, and the Snake River stocks, our Idaho fish, all go through the same gauntlet of gill nets, sea lions, seals, birds, all of it. Yet ours are the only fish going towards extinction. So it's got to be something else, and unless you believe that the ocean is a sentient being is deciding to kill fish, Idaho's fish over other fish, or sea lions think that they're more tasty. But barring that, that's why we want to. I think that's a really important note that we didn't quite touch on tonight. But as Eric had said, the less dams, the more fish have an opportunity to succeed coming back to Idaho. And the latest Columbia Snake River operators final environmental impact statement, that's a mouthful. For the first time, a judge forced them to study what would be the impacts of dam breaching on the increase of small to adult return ratios for Idaho. And as somebody had mentioned, you got to get to 2% just to flatline the population. 4% is where we can get healthy, harvestable, and economically viable populations. Dam breaching alternative in that FEIS was the only alternative that got us above 4%. That's really important to remember. So when folks say that we're not quite sure if dam breaching is going to help fish, well, we can measure. We know where the fish are dying, and multiple studies, the latest one being this 2020 CRSO FEIS, confirmed that it will get us up to the sustainable threshold that we need to be equal to the rivers downstream.
I'm tempted to wrap this up because we're on some good notes, but I also want to get a couple of questions covered that we haven't quite hit on the head. Sean says Idaho's economy is $83.6 billion, while Washington's economy is $663 billion. How is this going to impact Washington taxpayers? Downstream impacts?
Washington will still retain its ability to ship from the port in ports in the Tri-Cities. So I don't know exactly how it's going to impact taxpayers. Like Julia said, this sets up a one-time fund, the Columbia Basin Fund. So that's going to be That's an all-American taxpayer kind of thing. But the spending of this will at least be realized. So when I say that, I mean we'll build rail lines and we can use them. That will create jobs. Whereas right now, the spending that we're spending right now to say dredge the river, that is not a realized cost, and so that's a loss. There is this fund set up, but at least we can put this money aside so it will produce a profit rather than right now, which is operating in the red. I don't know. That's a tough question to answer the way it was asked.
Yeah, I mean, I think valid though, right? Like we're looking at a monumental effort, and there's going to be impacts for all the way out to the mouth of the Columbia is the hope, right? And then beyond that, out into the ocean. So, but thank you very much for jumping in on that, even though they are a little broad.
Well, I think a broad response to a broad question is, and an honest one, hopefully, is it would be disingenuous to give exact numbers to any questions like that. We don't know. Like there will be impacts proximate, like in the immediate term to recreation and to other industry with dam removal. That will happen. Like we can replace things. We can put in alternatives. I think, but the point is we can put in alternatives for key industries and structures. And ultimately, we can look at other things. Like if we take fish mitigation and other costs away from BPA, which is the primary power producer across the Northwest, not least in Washington, then rates stand to go down. And if we increase sport fishing and abundance and invest in recreation tourism and new industry in battery storage and other technologies in the Tri-Cities area, then we stand to increase tourism recreation money as well as new investments in the technology hub. So it'd be disingenuous, I think, to put a price tag on it firmly, but to say that there is certainly more promise than not in building something new and better than in trying to sustain something that has been falling apart.
And we're starting to see a few folks drop off, so I do want to say right now, if what you've heard here tonight is something that you want to get behind, you want to show some support, there's a big take action button on the bottom of the screen. Please hit that, and it will take you to a very clean, easy page to put your information down. It just says take action on Representative Simpson's salmon and energy proposal. Idaho's wild salmon and steelhead are headed for extinction unless we choose a bold path to rebuild infrastructure in the Northwest. This discussion that we've had here tonight, which was fantastic, and again, thank you so much to everybody who has tuned in from all across the country, because we are talking about an issue that affects everyone. This is our clean water and our collective salmon, collective steelhead, collective habitat, collective recreational opportunities. So thank you once again. And I'd like to give everybody an opportunity to maybe just give a parting shot as far as probably if you want to send folks home with a good question to think on or a good spot to find more information, what would it be? Julia, go for it. It's late where you are.
It is. It's 10:30 where I am, or almost 10:30. Yeah, I mean, go to backcountryhunters.org. You can read up on how we feel about the issue overall. I do, again, highly recommend going to Congressman Simpson's website to read the proposal yourself. That's simpson.house.gov. It's the first thing on his landing page that you can access. yeah, please take action. I mean, I know I've said this multiple times, but we really need our elected officials to come to the table and have these conversations. These are hard conversations to have, but it's exciting to have something in writing on this. What I know these folks on this panel have done a great job explaining and have been working on for years. So let's take advantage of that opportunity. This is the time, right? I think not only because of the decline in populations for salmon and steelhead, but the Pacific Northwest, the members of Congress have great leadership roles. You have Senator Murray, she's number 2 in the Senate. You have Cantwell, she's the chairwoman of the Commerce Committee. You have Wyden and Crapo, who are lead the Finance Committee. On the House side, you have DeFazio, chairman of Transportation and Infrastructure. You have McMorris Rogers, who is ranking member of the Energy and Commerce. And then you have Simpson, who is ranking member of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Energy and Water Development. So these are great leadership roles, and that's like very unique. And I think you guys really need to understand that for the Pacific Northwest. So it's time to take advantage of it. And the stars have aligned this Congress. So let's get it done.
Thank you, Julia. Aaron, any parting shots?
Yeah. Well, first, thanks folks for tuning in. Thanks, Cal, for putting this on and asking good questions. And thanks to the other panelists for indulging me. I guess my parting shot would be something similar, which is we've tried everything. We've tried everything to bring fish back, and there are bigger issues at play here, bigger than fish, which is hard to say coming from a guy who represents fishing outfitters. But there are issues bigger than fish here that we need to solve, and the good news is we can. It's complex, that's for sure. There are mountains to move. The good news is we have the technology, we have the insight, we have the willpower. Hard things are hard, but we can do hard things. We can still do hard things. I mean, as I've said to folks before, I know Brian and Eric have heard it, but we put a man on the moon, we split the atom. We can do hard things. Building a rail line comparatively is not hard. Finding out how to put the assurances in place, we can do all those things. So much of what I hear talking to people is reasons why not, like fears why not. And I get it. Like, change is scary, change is big, and this is big, but we can do it. And I just hope that, I would hope that folks would take action with that link. But short of that, if you're not convinced, and if you have questions or concerns, I hope that you just talk to people. Give IOGA a call, give me a call, talk to people, ask questions, talk to your neighbor, ask what they think. But don't just shoot it down because it's different. Like, we should do better than this. We can do better. And the future, if we all get together around it, stands to be brighter for all of us. So hope we'd all just be a version of ourselves in this opportunity.
We're going to move over to the romantic, Eric Crawford.
Yeah, I think that, what Aaron says is kind of the way I look at it, and certainly an ethos within TU, on our projects, particularly in our water and habitat program, where we work on very large restoration and water management projects throughout the nation. We are committed to always making everybody whole. And that's a story that should be repeated in this situation. Right now, everybody is not whole, and that's the important thing. Although we focused a lot on talking about fish, that in reality, they're on a trajectory for extinction, but we owe it to our neighbors, our proverbial neighbors, whether that's the agricultural industry, and listening to them and what their needs are to offset the current situation that they are in, that certainly benefits that industry with affordable barging through the system. Along with that is transportation. But none the least, one thing that we didn't talk about is the tribal sovereign nations within the basin and the treaty trust obligations that we as a nation committed to and have defaulted on. And that's what it means to come out whole. Right now, there are winners and there are losers. We just need to level the playing field and make make certain consideration of everybody involved and make sure that everybody comes out whole once and for all. And, none the least, I mean, it's important as we've all said to contact, whether it's your congressional delegates or your local electeds, and express your support for Simpson's proposal and issue them to take action and support that, but also to take into consideration those other needs that are throughout the basin. I'll be the first one to admit, man, I like catching steelhead and I like catching salmon, but we got to make everybody whole. So if you would like more information at TU, you can go to tu.org/Lower Snake. And we have a really great landing page with a lot of great information there. But again, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight, and really great to share the screen with everybody. So thank you.
Thanks, Eric. I forgot to say thank you also, Aaron. You did a great job. Brian, would you like to take a parting shot here?
Yeah. I think I was just going to say quite a lot about what Eric had already said, but I think it's just important for people to remember that the conversation about this issue, it's been contentious for 50 years. This is not the same issue as it was 20 years ago. As I said at the beginning of this event, there are new economic variables, and it's more than just about fish. We really have to, when we're talking about this and trying to comprehend it, it's not just about fish. It's about securing reliable power, and it's about producing a transportation system that's sustainable and creates a profit. And it's about making a system that isn't leaving anybody behind anymore, because the current system is hurting people, and it's hurting us in economic ways, in cultural ways, and for the Native American tribes in spiritual ways. And I think we're better than that. We have an opportunity to fix three crises we're facing here with transportation, with power, and with fish. And we used to make big things happen in this country, and I think that it's possible to do that again if you come at it from a win-win-win scenario. And I think it's time for the Northwest to realize that a system that leaves anybody behind is not a system we should support. So it's doable, and it's doable as long as the grassroots folks contact their representatives, the people who have their hands on the levers of power. So don't forget to take action. There's a button down here, like Cal had said. After this event, call your representatives and your senators' offices. They keep score of who's calling them about what and what they support. And that, it sounds cliche, but that can get you pretty far these days. They're still listening. And this is a big issue, and it's gaining traction. We're all here talking about it. So I guess I want to leave on a note of hope that there is momentum behind this for the first time in 50 years, really, to do something big for everybody.
That's great. Well, thank you guys very much. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you especially to the absolutely astounding 864 participants that are still signed in after an hour and a half. Fantastic. You people are unbelievable. And you don't have to take anybody's word for any of this stuff. There's still plenty of research you can do. One of those spots is at simpson.house.gov/salmon, and start asking good questions like you did here tonight, and you'll start finding good answers. Once again, thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.